Hi, I'm Brooklyn Howell, and this is my presentation on legal issues in kinesiology. Look at facility background and risk management kind of at the same time. My, target population was PE teachers and where they work and where they teach. So for facility background, it's going to be gyms and fields most of the time where students are. We look at making sure that students stay clear of the boundaries. So in a gym, it'll be the walls, and on a field possibly could be fences. But we have, in the case of Brewington versus the city of Philadelphia, the instructions given to a class where they were doing relay races were to run down, touch the wall, and run back. And a student on the way down to the wall unfortunately tripped and fell into the wall and hit his head and suffered a severe head injury. The parents sued for wanton and willing misconduct on the teacher. The defendant ended up, it was not deemed willful and wanton, but the injury could have been avoided if the students were not having to touch the wall, if maybe they went to a line in the gym instead or ran around a cone that was away from the wall. And so that's a way to avoid that risk. And then we have transition places. For a lot of places, it's going to be hallways. And this is a case where actually a teacher got injured. He was trying to encourage fitness and doing different things and being active with the students in the hallway. And he ended up running at a wall and trying to jump off the wall and I think hit the ceiling with his hand. But he did it once and then he tried again and he hurt his ankle. And so he filed for workers' comp and it was denied. And so he sues, and it turns out that the school does not have to cover his medical bills because he was not acting in his role as a PE teacher. He was deemed acting as an individual and therefore was responsible for his own medical bills as a result of his injury, because jumping off a wall is not part of his job. And then we got to look at equipment. A lot of times PE classes are using equipment. That's a great part of PE is getting to try out different sports, different activities. Teachers need to make sure that they make those activities as safe as they can. In the case of Barr versus Cunningham in 2017, a student sued his teacher because he got hit in the eye playing hockey. And he said that the teacher did not make the game as safe as it should be. The teacher was fortunate that she had taken many steps to make the game as safe as she possibly could. She had used softer equipment. I believe she used a softer puck instead of a hard puck, and she had smaller games, and she had modified some of the rules, and I believe there's something else she did to ensure that the game would be as safe as possible. It's hockey. You still have hockey sticks, so there are going to be risks there, but she did not just let 50 kids go out there and have a free-for-all. And so she ended up not being responsible for the child's injuries. And in some cases, I noted in here that there's protection. If you have protection available, offer it to the students. Some may want it, some may not, but for the most part, it needs to be offered if you have it. That's just an extra way to protect yourself or your employer from a risk. And then continue. We have safety instructions. Some of our activities that PE teachers teach are or can be unsafe if safety procedures are not followed. And in the case of Brahacek versus Millard School District, this is a case where a student actually died from the injuries he suffered in PE. The student had missed a first day of a golf unit, and when the teachers on the first day, they taught all the safety procedures and how to hold a golf club and where to stand to make sure you're not in the way of getting hit by a golf club if someone is swinging it. Well, the next day of school, the student was there and he missed all that. And when it was his turn to hit a golf ball, he didn't know how to hold the club. And so another student came to help him. When the other student was trying to demonstrate for him, the boy was too close. And when he swung, he hit the other boy in the head. And unfortunately, he died later, and the parents sued the school district. So just a risk management from that is always remind your students of the safety concerns and procedures and where they need to be. And they may get tired of hearing it, but it needs to be said. Because in some cases, it could be potentially the difference between life and death. And that's just a way to protect you and protect your students and protect your employee Just always say the safety things. And then supervision. A lot of PE is supervising. You give an activity, you give instructions, trying to make it as safe as possible, but still things can happen. And you need to be there watching and close enough to address an issue if something happens. In the case of Jones versus Jones, the male PE teacher was supposed to be watching the male class play basketball. He had walked over to tell the female PE teacher that she was needed in the office. And when he went to do this, the basketball game got a little rough and a fight broke out. And as part of the fight, one of the boys slammed another boy into the ground. And as he was being slammed to the ground, his head hit metal bleachers and he suffered a serious head injury. And as part of his injuries, he missed school. He struggled, and he potentially could have lifelong effects from that one head injury in his PE class. So his parents did sue for negligence, and so that can be avoided by just making sure you're there. If you in that specific case, the message needed to be relayed to the female PE teacher, he could have got another student to relay that message over to her versus walking away from where he was in the gym. And so that's all. You've always got to be there. You can't leave your students unsupervised at any time. And also there's locker rooms. I did not look into locker rooms for my presentation, but that's another issue along with supervision and just making sure students are doing what they're supposed to in a locker room for their safety and your safety, because a lot of schools do have locker rooms, and many issues and many legal cases arise from locker room issues. Now we'll transition into employment law and look at a wrongful termination lawsuit. And this was Macy versus Hopkins County Board of Education. And Macy was a teacher at her school, and she had already been a PE teacher there for a little bit. And one year she suffered a head injury from a bike incident that was unrelated to school. And then a few years later, she was in a car accident that worsened her head injury. And she was able to get a 504 plan where the school board and the school had to provide accommodations for her. And so the school tried to meet these accommodations. She, in her lawsuit, says they did not meet all of her accommodations, but that's not what her lawsuit was about. She was terminated after it was found out that she told a group of boys who were outside unsupervised, as she was telling them to go back inside the school, somehow in her conversation, she threatened to kill those students, and it was repeated. And so when the school found out, they immediately terminated this teacher. She went on to say that her outburst of threatening to kill the students was because of her disability, which the school knew about. She was could be found irritable and have outbursts of anger and those kind of things, and said that was from her disability. So she could not be fired because it was a action based on her disability, and therefore the school was discriminating her because of her disability. The case took some time and took some digging into, but they ended up concluding that the school could terminate the teacher because the disability does not excuse all behaviors. Death threats are not excusable, even if your disability is the cause of the death threat. So they were able to legally terminate her position, which is interesting to know as an employee and an employer, that there are some things that are excusable and not excusable. Then your disability does and doesn't always protect certain actions, which in some cases I believe is a good thing. And then our next case for employment law is equal pay. We had Horner versus the Mary Institute, and this is back in the 1980s, but it was similar to the case in our book. The female PE teacher sues the school institute because the male PE teacher is making more money than her. These two teachers came in at the same time, and they did have different job responsibilities and education levels, so it ended up Mary Institute came out on top of this case and did not have to do equal pay. The male teacher had a higher education. He had more responsibilities. He was in charge of creating a curriculum, whereas the female teacher was just in charge of implementing a curriculum. And so they deemed that equal pay was not necessary because, again, their jobs technically were different. Even though they shared the same title, the jobs had different aspects to them. And then we go into hiring practices. A case where Walter versus Hamburg Center School District, an age and sex discrimination case, was a 50-year-old PE teacher. She was on their sub list, and she had applied for a job several times in the district, and they would not hire her. And younger candidates would get the job who were not as qualified as her. The school district ended up saying that the 50-year-old sub would often make it to the interview process. And the school district said they decided their hires mainly on the interview and not on their resumes. And so they were not considered to be discriminating by age or sex because of the way their interview process worked. So there's some more interesting facts on that case that I found out too, but I don't have enough time to go into all that. Now we'll look at our application real quick. Facility equipment supervision, emergency training, discrimination and contracts, all those things need to be looked at, especially if you're the boss. One thing that stuck out to me in this was, now I see why they do it, is PE teachers in my school district, we all have to take CPR. And we're all considered first responders at our schools. So we're trying to do some of the minimum stuff, but it's definitely necessary in our position. And so that's one of the way our school covers themselves. And I would require that too, would have teachers trained in CPR. And also just know, you got to know so many things really that seem little, but if you want to run a business or be a boss, these are things you need to know to keep yourself from being liable and your employer from being liable. And you want to be fair to your employees anyway, or you should at least that goes into our faith integration. You should want to be fair. And so making sure you meet those legal requirements, because usually the law is pretty fair in most cases. Now, our faith integration is looking at, one verse I found was Matthew 7:12, which says, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. So treat others the way you want to be treated. And then Philippians 2:13 is talking about selfish ambition. And I'll try to move me a little bit. But it's, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves. If you're treating others better than you would be treated, then you should be great at being a boss because you're taking care of your employees. The next verse I found was 1 Peter 5:12. And it's talking about being a shepherd of God's flock, and not necessarily your employers are not necessarily God's flock. And that's okay, but I added my own little interpretation of this is, if you're the boss, it's your job to kind of look out for your employees. You're not doing things to gain for you, and you definitely don't want to be dishonest in your gaining, but you want to serve your employees so they can do the best work for you. In that kind of case, in that kind of instance. So not necessarily your Christian flock, but it is your business flock, which I believe there are some correlations there many times. And then our faith integration continued is, your faith, I found out through this course, is that your faith cannot interfere with your work. You are allowed certain religious expressions and freedom of speech, but when your faith starts to interfere with your work, that is when you can be terminated legally from your job. It may be hard to prove, but if they can prove it, then they legally can fire you because of your religion, in a sense. Then you have harassment. If employees or employers or your coworkers are asking you not to speak about your faith, and you choose to ignore their wanting you not to, and you continue, then you can be liable, and to a certain extent, harassment. And if you're a boss and you allow employees to harass other people about their religion, you also are in the wrong. You cannot let your workplace become unsafe or hostile because of religion. And then you need to know company policies. For PE, some school districts are more lax, and some of them are more strict on what is allowed to be spoken, what is allowed to be worn, what is allowed to be read at their schools. So you need to know those. And then Title VII religious requirements as far as discrimination and just other things in the Civil Rights Act that I wouldn't have known were there without having to look further into it. Just so many things you need to know about to protect you, protect your employee, know what you can and cannot do. And that is pretty much all I have for this presentation. I know I went the full 15 minutes, but I did enjoy this course, and I did learn a lot. And here are my reference slides. And there you go. That's all I got. Thank you.